Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. So today I wanted to talk about something a little bit heavy, and it's the idea of going through a really deep suffering, a really deep struggle, weather the storm, as they say. And I was inspired by my recent conversations with my closest friends and also colleagues. And I want to keep this podcast as authentic as possible. So it was something that came up and made me want to explore what exactly it means when we say you've got to go through the suffering to get to the other side. And so I wanted to dissect that and hopefully make it a little more palatable and understandable. Welcome to the Good.Enough.Shrink podcast. We are your hosts. I am Jenna Chang, a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist practicing here in Los Angeles, California.
And I'm Dr. Patrick Kelly. I am also a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist practicing in the Los Angeles area.
We are on a mission to demystify child psychiatry and have conversations surrounding difficult topics on youth and adult mental health, but not without a little play along the way. Before we get started, there are two things I want to say to set the basis. One is the timing. The time to listen to this episode is if you are really going through the thick of it. Not if you're anxious about what's to come, fearful about what's to come, or you've been suffering for a long time and you are on the way to finding a direction, a plan, a solution out of it. If you're at that latter point, instead of this episode, you need motivation, you need a plan, a backup plan, a change of scenery, etc. But sometimes all of those things are not what you need, especially if you're going through unimaginable grief, unimaginable pain. It's not the time. So this episode is for you if you're at a time in your life where you're going through really deep struggles and you have no answers and you feel trapped. The other thing I want to mention before we get started is to really assess your personality type and your characteristics before you listen to this, because I'm really talking to people who usually have a sense of control in their lives. They have the answers, they can figure things out. They're not used to withering away from overwhelming emotions. If you're someone who's been on top of it for years and you are facing adversity and you're at a point where all else have failed, this episode is for you. But if you're someone who often feels overwhelmed by your feelings, you have trouble containing them, coping with them, and you feel out of control fairly often, this episode is not for you. Because what you need is, first of all, validation for your feelings and experience, but then a genuine push towards logical thinking, guidance, practical solution, and practice on how to cope so you can get out of this perpetual cycle of emotional misery. So having said these two premises, hopefully this is a helpful listen for you. So first of all, let's talk about what happens to your body when you're going through significant stress, depression, tragedy, loss. Your limbic system is the part of the brain that activates when you're stressed. These include structures like the amygdala, which is the emotion assessment center, the hypothalamus, which is involved in processing that, and then the hippocampus, which is involved in memory formation. So these areas and others are collectively functioning as the threat assessment center. When you're going through a very tough time or chronic suffering, your limbic system is firing all the time. You are in fight or flight, you are in hyperarousal, and as long as you're here, you cannot learn from your experience because memory does not consolidate. So you can't recall details, you can't problem solve based on information, you can't access your curiosity, your creativity, and your confidence. This might not be anything new to you if you've been listening to this podcast, but it is a very important point. So then the next question is, that's happening in the brain. What happens to your body? All that stress is stored in the body as tension, usually muscle tension. So what do you get? Tension headaches, backaches, spasms. And if it's really bad, you could get fibromyalgia or migraines because your nervous system is overworked, or as they say, your nerves are shot. So over time, this tension is too much for you to bear. So what does your body do? Well, you become numb. Your body decides not to feel them. And you get the sense of numbness, emptiness, and a feeling that you don't really care about stuff. Now, this is a red flag because with long-term numbing, you actually start to seek stimulation in the external world just to feel something. Because the combination of either pain or numbness is just not a life worth living. So you want some sort of dopamine hit, you want some sort of high. And so people turn to things like drugs, alcohol, gambling, shopping, exercise addiction, binge eating, starvation, all these mechanisms to try to escape your inner world that is full of pain or numbness. So this is actually expected if you're going through chronic stress. This is your body's way of protecting you from all that pain. But there's a way to bypass this cycle, which is to be aware of your emotional states. So this is the only way to access your limbic system consciously. So that means that you are intentionally, consciously accessing those emotions before they overtake you. And this is why therapists and psychiatrists say it's so important to identify your feelings, identify your emotions, right? The feeling wheel. Because if you are self-aware of what emotions you're feeling and you can verbalize it, you can identify them, then you can have a relationship with your limbic system. So you're not totally consumed by it. You can mentalize, meaning that you recognize your emotional state as something that's part of you, but not all of you. You can observe it, watch it do its thing, and not be completely overwhelmed by its erratic nature. But all of this is science, so probably not helpful if you're suffering and you're in the thick of it. Sometimes the pain is so much and you really can't understand what weathering the storm means unless you go through an example. So, story time. And I want to give a warning that I am about to talk about suicide. So if that's a trigger for you, please be aware. So as with many things that are challenging, they happen when you least expect it. So this happened when I was a second-year psychiatry resident. So that means I've been practicing psychiatry for just 2 years. Sadly, 2 patients I had cared for died by suicide within a week. And one was a teenager with autism. I had no idea how to process this. I felt shocked, I felt helpless, and I started to doubt everything I did. I also had to keep working, doing rounds, listening to patients, answering questions, doing overnight calls, and learning new materials. So the sleep deprivation, physical and mental exhaustion were getting to me. But when you're in your 20s, you really don't think about all of that. I thought I was invincible. I kept up with my routines. And I still remember my answer to the question during residency interviews, how do you cope with stress, was positive self-talk. So you can kind of imagine the state of mind I was in. I was pushing through. But anybody who's spent more than a moment of reflection on their feelings and emotions knows that positive self-talk is just not going to cut it when you're facing a tragedy like suicide that impacts the individual, the family, the entire community. And so eventually I also noticed something else was changing within me, which was that I stopped caring. I was going through my day, getting things done, but I felt numb and empty and irritable. And what snapped me out of it was how I talked to the parents of a patient. So I'll change some identifying information to protect the identity of these people. But I was working in the hospital that same year, and this 15-year-old girl was admitted for suicidal ideation and self-harm. And she was gay. And we were having a family meeting, and she was advocating for herself, for her beliefs, and what was important to her. And her parents were absolutely rejecting of it. They were having none of it. They blamed it all on her hormones, and they even made fun of her at some point. So then I turned to the parents and said, "Do you see what you're doing to your own child?" Now, I am not like this. I usually package the same exact message, but in a very different tone to align both the parents and the child to the same goal, which is that we want the child to feel better and stabilize and move on with their life. And so this was not me. I knew I had a bite and I knew I had to pull back. Now, oftentimes, 99% of the time, you have no idea what you're dealing with until you reflect. And in retrospect, you realize all of these things that are bothering you, right? So I had to pause and think hard about what was going on with me. So objectively speaking, I understood that having 2 suicides in such a short period of time in your second year of training was devastating. And we went through the cases with our attendings, our teams. We dissected it, and everyone was reassuring me that we did everything we possibly could. And I cognitively understood that, but I couldn't move past it. So I just started recording down all my feelings and thoughts like a stream of consciousness and realized this is why it's so important to name all your emotions, because if you are able to verbalize what you're feeling, you can give yourself a story, a narrative to which you can understand yourself. And if you feel like you can't do this, talk to a therapist. That's why they're there. But if you have stigma or access issues to a therapist, then you can even talk to someone that you trust. Just know that that person will have a different agenda, which is for you to feel better as soon as possible. And sometimes that's not quite the approach you should take. Sometimes you really have to sit in your feelings to give respect to those emotions so that you can consciously access that limbic system. So I want to go through the emotions I felt at the time. You may not be going through anything remotely similar, but there's something about chronic stress, chronic suffering that has the same flavor. The very first thing I felt was a lot of disbelief. I could not believe that it had happened. The disbelief that those people who once existed were gone and that it happened to me. I think my ego just could not have me believe that I was susceptible to a devastation like this. So there was this complete shock and disbelief that went on in the background like a current all the time. And I also felt that it was deeply personal. I knew these patients had been suffering for a long time and there was nothing else I could have done, but I felt like I caused the final loss of hope. I thought of a million different things I could have done. It felt like a stab to my sense of worth, abilities, my potential. And then I felt immense anger. I was angry at everything and everyone. I was angry at my attendings for not teaching me how to prevent this. I was angry at my residency for being so challenging. And I was even angry at my patients for giving up. Now I understand a lot of this anger was a projection of my own insecurities onto other people. But at the time, it was so intense and I was just indignant. Nothing felt fair. And then I felt really alone. I knew intellectually, cognitively, that my colleagues, my friends, my family were there for me, that they would stop in a heartbeat to hang out with me and console me. But that wasn't the point. I felt like nobody truly understood what I was going through. And I was finding comfort and validation in reading very depressing books and listening to sad music because it was the only thing that contained that feeling for me. And then I just felt sad, lots of sadness for the patients, families, the community at large, sad for the fact that there is no absolute treatment against suicide. There's no independent predictor of suicide. We do what we can every single day, but ultimately, who has the right to stop anyone who has made up their mind? At this point, I was thinking, okay, stop. I really need therapy. So, of course, that was immensely helpful. And then also time. Time was incredibly healing in a very slow and steady way. I share this in hopes of highlighting the reality of what processing suffering looks like. Therapy is not always meant to help you feel happier or better. It's so that you can respect all these feelings that are there for a reason. If you ignore them, they always come back with a vengeance that you can't control. But reflection, introspection helps you become self-aware. And again, self-awareness is the only way you can access your emotions consciously. You can't help feelings because they just come to you, but you can have a relationship with them. If you're aware of when, what, how, and the meaning of your feelings, you can build a relationship with them without being buried by them. Sometimes I'll say this to kids, but your feelings are your friends. They're just there to warn you about what's going on inside of you. But the battle of your suffering is always you against you. So I do recommend also being alone with your thoughts, as much as we hate doing that. We really do. But you have to feel the rise and the fall of these feelings in your body, in your mind. And if it's too much to bear, you do want a support system around you. But it's really important to ride the wave, as they say, on your own, because you are the only person that can get through this. Now, when should you really be concerned? Because there is a difference between ordinary grief and suffering and clinical depression. In the former, you feel like your external world has lost something and you're grieving. But in clinical depression, you feel like you lost a part of yourself. So you can't function day to day, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't take care of your hygiene, and you often do not want to move. Importantly, you've lost interest in things that used to bring you joy. So if you're feeling these things, it's time to seek professional help and address that clinical level of depression. Last thing I want to say is a little bit about medications, since we are a psychiatry platform. Psychotropic medications never cure anything. They manage our symptoms. And so I like to describe medications as not taking away your suffering or pain, but giving you the strength to rise above it, to get through it, so you can carry on with your life. When you are at the bottom of the pit, it rises you to a mid-level so that you can go on and do the things you need to do, like therapy. So for depression, there are antidepressants, which is a misnomer because it's really a lot more helpful for anxiety. But the first line is usually SSRIs, or serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And these are what I would call serotonin regulators. It's not as simple as you're increasing your serotonin, but you're regulating the balance of serotonin in your body. So these are meds like Prozac, Lexapro, Zoloft. And then we also have adjuncts, medications that will boost the effects of antidepressants. And these are usually in the category of antipsychotics. But again, a misnomer, because really they're dopamine regulators. They work on a different neurotransmitter. So these are medications like Abilify, Risperidone, and Seroquel. And sometimes we're looking at depression on the bipolar polarity. And so if you're looking at severe mood swings, irritability, erratic behavior, disorganized thinking, high risk taking, combined with these depressive episodes, we're looking at mood stabilizers like lithium, Depakote, Lamictal. So I list these things out because I want you to know that there are so many options out there. So talk to your mental health provider, talk to your psychiatrist, because there's always something to try. So that concludes this episode. I hope that the combination of information and storytelling is helpful. I always find that balance to be most intriguing, so I'm hoping that this kind of format can reach more people. We are very grateful that there are so many listeners from all over the world. If you would like to leave a comment or a review or a like, that would be awesome. It will help us get out there and spread the word. As always, our only goal is to make this corner of the internet that you stumbled upon a little brighter. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.